we were trying to make inks that you could print directly on textiles. So the whole mission has always been like soft, flexible electronics, e-textiles. That's the goal. But the challenge is that they have to be scalable, they have to be cheap, they have to be robust.
In this episode of The Bomb, Engineering a Path Forward, we're going to talk about the actual applications of e-textiles and wearable tech, which are not quite like some of the sci-fi images you've probably seen. Rather than something from a cyberpunk storybook, e-textiles have found a place in everything from seat warmers in cars to robotics with haptic feedback. Today we speak with Madison Maxey. She's the founder and CEO of Loomia, an e-textile company redefining what's possible in flexible circuitry and electronics integrated fabrics. We'll get a peek into Madison's predictions about the future in the wearable electronics space and what she learned throughout her 5-year journey to get Loomia off the ground. This is my conversation with Madison Maxey, and this is The Bomb. We live in a time where design and technology touch every aspect of our lives. But where did it all come from? Who designed it? How was it built and brought to market? What will it look like in a year, 2 years, 100 years? From the phones and smartwatches that help us in our day-to-day to the cutting-edge spaceships and 3D printers that are leading us into the future, modern design is constantly shaping the way we work, communicate, problem solve, and play. And every new design, big or small, starts with an idea and a bill of materials. I'm Magenta Strongheart, and this is The Bomb, where we talk to leading innovators in the tech world and celebrate the transformational power of design.
At Loomia, we make soft and flexible electronics that can heat, light, sense, and more. So we generally, for customers, we have a set of baseline patents. We customize our technology for customers, and then we can manufacture it in bulk. So like an example application might be, if somebody is making like a medical device and wants to streamline the cabling, we can make them a custom part that's like a wire harness replacement, and that thing could go to production. They're meant to be laminated onto textiles, but the part that we make is actually it's like a composite material. It's like if you look at it, it feels kind of like a rubber silicone thing on the surface. So that's what gets stuck to the fabric, and that's what sort of becomes the e-textile.
And so I know that you guys will do a lot of, like you said, kind of custom consulting for larger companies, but you also have awesome kind of prototype off-the-shelf components that you manufacture as well that people can buy on your store online. And I know you produce a lot of kind of educational content around these components. Could you tell us a little bit more about kind of how Loomia divides the work that you all are focused on, or what that split is across those kind of different customers or clients, you could say?
I would say like 95% of our customer base is companies that have at least like 10 people or more, mostly large companies. And then 5% might be like wild card, startup or something like that. In terms of our customer base, which is kind of what we spend the most time on. And these prototyping parts, I think that they're good for the DIY community, but we really design them with our customers in mind, because when an engineer from a company is buying a new material, they always want to touch something, they want to feel something, they need to evaluate if it's right for their needs. So the prototyping parts we send to our corporate customers that they can see if the product's right for them, but we also make them available for prototypers or, DIY or students, whoever wants to use them.
Can you give us a few examples of what exactly Loomia has been a part of as far as specific applications or ways that it's been incorporated into a product?
In terms of the ones that are public that we can share, we were part of this robot called the Bionic Soft Arm. It's developed by Festa, which is a big German robotics company. And we made a pressure matrix for the end effector of the robot. So basically, the end of the robot is a hand. And if you use flux PCBs or wires for sensors on the hand, they don't have the right mechanics. So they used our material to basically make a glove that goes on the robot, and the glove gives the robot a sense of touch. that was a really fun project. I think it was like a cool example of how e-textiles can be used again in some of these places that you wouldn't necessarily expect. We also have done we did some interiors or a concept car interior development for Hyundai Kia. And so that was in one of their concept cars that they showed in Korea, and it was for door panel integration. So it's like a lot of that kind of stuff. It's like these little sort of corners of different products, and we'll make a component for it.
Awesome. No, that's, I think, helpful for our audience to kind of visualize where, these places might go and bring it a little bit more to reality rather than, I think, some of the sci-fi places that people imagine when they hear, e-textiles or things that are more integrated into softer materials and this kind of thing. And so I'd love to hear more about kind of your journey to founding Loomia and getting into material science and engineering. I was lucky enough to visit you at Stanford a couple years ago. And yeah, how did you get into this, as far back as you feel like going, but a little bit of how you, found this curiosity for this sort of thing and then decided to take the leap to start a company.
Yeah, no, it was nice we could meet there. I mean, I did my undergrad late, so I was doing the undergrad schlep, and I'm glad that that's done now. But I feel like kind of the core is that I've always really liked making things and understanding how things are made, like putting products together. I started out, we had a sewing machine at my house. It was like, great, I'll make clothes. I want to go into design. And I really kind of like dedicated myself as much as I could to learning the craft. So I was really into all the stitches and the fibers and like all of the mechanics of making a garment. Like there's a lot that goes into it. Sometimes you need certain installations. I like wanted to know what all of them were about. And then I got to design school, and some of the students there, it was their first time using a sewing machine. And I was like, I really want to learn something new. Like I want to like be pushed and really challenged. And so I decided to take programming classes because I wanted to make a website. That was more of what got me into the technology side of things. And then I think after the programming classes, like my friend introduced me to Arduino. I was like, oh, this is super interesting. I can make more stuff with this. So it was always just kind of like one foot in front of the other. I would kind of think of something I wanted to work on that I didn't quite have all the skills for. And then I would, try and figure it out or try and make a prototype. I would say material science and engineering really started entering the picture because I was doing a lot of, this was like, in the subject of wearables, I was doing a lot of like wearable technology prototypes for companies. And it was very hard to scale them because you needed a soft, flexible circuit to really bring them to market. And at that point, it was a little bit difficult to find them. So I started working on this conductive inks project during a residency I was doing at Autodesk. And one of the material scientists there was nice enough to take time with me to mix together conductive ink formulas and work with materials. And I just thought his job was really cool. I wanted to make more ink. So I was like, I should do material science. And we also ended up getting funding to like further develop this inks. That's a lot of how Loomia truly started. It was very much so a kind of like an exploratory process where I sort of like kept following curiosity. And then at some point, someone was willing to invest some money to take something in a specific direction. And so I was like, great, why not? I think like looking back on things, it wasn't like a normal startup journey where I think sometimes people are like, oh, there's a market opportunity in cups. I'm going to go make cups and sell them. It was very much so like a more fluid process, for better or for worse.
When Loomia started, you mentioned the kind of e-ink project. Were you guys making inks at first, or what was kind of the first direction of Loomia? Or by that time, had you decided for sure that it was going to be more in the e-textile space?
We were trying to make inks that you could print directly on textiles. So the whole mission has always been like soft, flexible electronics, e-textiles. That's the goal. But the challenge is that they have to be scalable, they have to be cheap, they have to be robust. And so we were thinking that inks could take us in that direction. So we actually had a centrifugal mixer in the studio, which was like one of my favorite tools.
I can imagine.
It's really cool. Yeah, you just like put all the ingredients in and it like sloshes this tube around until you have like a homogeneous mixture. And so we were using that to sort of like mix up these silver particle inks and like print them on textiles. I ended up working with someone who I knew from Autodesk, and he was really good at building syringe extruders, like a CNC syringe extrusion machine. So he built this plotter, and we would like mix up our ink and pour it in the plotter, and then it would extrude it into a circuit pattern on a fabric. It was super cool, but I think that the problem with that is that that's not. I mean, I guess it could be scalable, but you have to like build a ton of these machines to make that scalable. And you need a lot of money to build all those machines. And our conductive ink would also crack sometimes, and silver particles are really expensive. So we eventually, I'm not sure like when the turning point was, but at some point we were like, maybe we should do something else. But that was the first thing we tried. That was our first approach.
I think that's, that happens a lot kind of in different startup journeys we've heard, of course. You have to kind of try something and then figure out what's next from there. It's not very often that it's like the first idea, takes you all the way to where you are now necessarily. But it does, as far as like it's an evolution, right? It informed the next step, I'm sure, that you all took.
Yeah, it really did. And I appreciate that you said that, because I do think there's that saying of like, how do you eat an elephant one bite at a time? And it's like the first few bites are probably just figuring out like what it tastes like and what you're eating. And like, maybe you shouldn't start with the feeder. You're kind of like building your strategy. So I think making something new is a lot of that, where it's like the first attempt is maybe just like trash, but it taught me all the stuff that I didn't think about and didn't know. And that helped inform the rest.
I was wondering, you've now been in this work for over 10 years. What are some of the most exciting things you've seen advance in e-textiles and the kind of the industry at large that you're excited about, or, your team is excited about, that you've seen?
I feel like there's so many things that I'm excited about. I feel like what I love seeing is all of these different groups sort of doing their part in order to make the industry more established and grow. So there are standard agencies. There's this one called IPC, which is meant to do electronics. You're nodding. I'm sure you know about IP, obviously. Yeah. And so they're doing a lot of e-textile standards. And it's like this work started maybe like 8 years ago or something. And now the standards are really coming out and people are looking at them and they're discussing them. That's really exciting. And then also a lot of these different new electronic form factors need certain dielectrics or insulators to actually make the full system. And so a lot of the like film companies are working on developments that support these kinds of materials. And then ink companies are working on conductive inks, and connector companies are making connectors. And I think I really like seeing how people who are kind of like specialists and experts in certain directions are kind of just like turning their focus 10% to make something that can help and support this industry. I think like those are sort of the material and component side of things that I really enjoy and I think are interesting. And then there's also the business side of things, where there's always sort of the question of what are these materials used for, who wants them? And I think a lot of the business cases are really starting to come together. And it's interesting to see people understanding like, oh, these materials are useful for end effector sensing. They're useful for AR/VR. They're useful for cable management. They're useful for auto interiors and surface heating and all of these things that were not obvious 10 years ago. I think everybody thought we were just going to have sci-fi clothes. And I love when we get a customer call and they're like, we have a pipe. Can you wrap this around our pipe and make it warm? And I'm like, that's cool. That's a real use case. Generally, they have a reason. They're like, oh, the bend radius of this other product just isn't, it's not tight enough. I'm like, cool. You have a reason. You have a need. The pipe needs warming. We can do that. So I think seeing these like really sort of grounded use cases come out are things that I also like.
We're going to take a quick break. When we come back, Madison gives us her playbook for connecting Loomia with the companies that need their products. Welcome back to The Bomb, Engineering a Path Forward. I'm your host, Magenta Strongheart. When we left off, Madison was explaining the specific types of textiles Loomia works with, the limited options that are out there, and how this illustrates that there's still so much opportunity in the field of wearable tech. Now we look at how the broader goals of wearables are often at odds with various companies and even the US Patent Office. I'm interested to kind of hear, with there being more connectors and kind of components available out there, how does Loomia continue to differentiate and kind of compete in the market, since there are more and more companies getting involved or expanding their product lines in this space? But you guys have really been in this industry for a long time as well, developing. So
Yeah. I mean, I think that there are a lot of different approaches to making an e-textile. And so I think, and they're all good for different things. Like I think our technology as a composite is something that's laminated is very appealing for like more industrial applications. And there are some companies that do more thread-based technologies that are very appealing for garment-based applications because of how they feel. So I feel like that's kind of one key differentiator, is that sort of the things that our material tends to be best at is not always what everyone is doing. I think in terms of competition, if somebody chooses one of our competitors over us, there's a good chance that their technology performs in ways that are different and are like more suited for the application than ours. So it's just kind of that like natural division. And so knowing what our technology is good at and focusing on that, I think helps us to stay competitive. But as far as we know, we're the only company using this particular technique and who provides services around it. And I think that that's sort of part of the business model, where it's like, if one of our customers wants a custom like HMI component for automotive, we have a 6 or 12-week timeline. We have manufacturing set up. We have certain fixed cost structures. We have a process in place that it's sort of easy for them to engage with us and get out what they need. And I think that also helps to set us apart, because that takes a long time to develop. Kind of having that insight and knowing what the customer needs takes some time. So I think that sometimes for the companies that are very new to the space, they haven't gotten the reps in that sort of like baseline of the customer needs.
absolutely. I think those are really excellent points. And I love that you also highlighted the kind of service you provide, and the business model is also important in addition to the kind of original technology that you offer, of course. And I think that that's something that, a lot of people can be overwhelmed or intimidated by when thinking about starting a company or scaling, a solution they've developed. Is obviously you worry about the competition in the market and that sort of thing. But I do think something that we see time and time again, of course, is what really builds a loyal customer base is the way that companies, of course, work with their customers, and the kind of, like you said, that the service that's provided is what makes people choose, one or the over the other. Even if we think about like daily decisions of companies we choose to interact with, right? It's like the people behind the company, or what we see, kind of our experience, the customer experience, of course. And so I think that's important to not forget. Sometimes, even if a technology is incredible, if the service is terrible, like people are not going to want to use it, I really value that you kind of pointed out both those sides. But of course, the technology you do have is also pretty amazing. And you are the lead inventor of 6 granted patents, which is pretty awesome. And I'd love to hear just kind of your experience with the patent process, and how you think the system, is working overall, especially when it comes to how quickly technology is moving in the startup world. I'd just love to hear your perspective on that.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I mean, I really like the USPTO, so I'm not, nothing against them as an organization, but I think nowadays, especially us, we're such a small company that if one of our clients doesn't respect our IP, like we're probably not going to sue them. I don't, I know that's like one of the core parts is like this legal and financial right to what you're doing is what the patent is supposed to grant you. But there are many cases where I think people cannot exercise or choose not to exercise that right. Also, if you are an individual inventor, some big company reads your patent, rips it off, you're probably not going to go after them unless you just like really have a lot of money to work with, which I think makes this like class hierarchy for individual inventors. It's not the same like romantic story that like the patent office, I think, used to have requirements that you had to actually build out a prototype and like bring it to the office and be like, look, it works. And they'd be like, okay, yeah, you could have a patent. I think now now you can just have an idea and like make some stuff up that nobody else has made up, maybe, and you can get a patent for it. And maybe you never test and it doesn't work, but somebody else figures out a way to make it work. And if there's not patentable content in there, then it's still yours. So, for better or for worse, I think you shouldn't be able to do that, in my opinion, because I feel like the challenge is actually making things work functionally most of the time. But anyways, that's my like long spiel. But what I think for most small companies, especially the value of a patent, is more marketing, and it's more in the negotiation chair, where if you don't have a patent, a big company will be like, why would I work with you? You don't have any special stuff. But if you have patents, you're like, we have some special stuff. You should work with us. And they can tell their bosses that you have this special stuff. And then you can negotiate in like these kind of soft value ways that you can't do without intellectual property.
I think that's actually really insightful, the kind of negotiation piece, because I do think that a lot of people, have heard the stories and kind of feel like you do, as far as if you're a smaller player against a huge company, you're not going to sue them, or it's not going to be worth kind of the resources to go down that path. And so a lot of people might think, okay, so what is, the value here? Why kind of bother doing it? And I think that negotiation piece is huge and obviously can result in more money, of course, which is important, but it also just kind of, like you said, legitimizes the value of the technology, the product, or, what you're kind of working with. So thanks. I think that's actually really helpful to kind of hear and talk through. But I have a few more questions. This is maybe kind of a fun, silly one, but are there any examples of technology that you remember reading about or seeing as a kid in a movie or something that exists today and you're kind of surprised or excited about that? Or it can be the opposite direction, kind of anything you remember that you can't believe doesn't exist yet.
Yeah. I do think that the AI stuff, people have their different views, but especially like with Sora, I think that when I was a kid, you just kind of thought that computers were already magic and that they could just do more magic. And they were doing like Oregon Trail kind of stuff. It was nowhere near what it is today. But I think that we all thought that it would be something where you could like talk to your computer, and now you can with some of these chat programs, which I think is pretty cool. Also, I not necessarily when I was a kid, but when I was a teenager, my dad was watching these Bitcoin documentaries with me, and I think that I just like didn't have enough wherewithal or information to know how to process and use this information. But it is really interesting now to see this idea of like where something starts and where it finishes. It's very hard to understand the first time you see something starting. But I feel like seeing these Bitcoin documentaries is one of those things where I was like, oh, what is this weird stuff? And now, even though it's a crazy industry, it's worth like 60K a coin today. And just to be like, wow, it went from that. I mean, at that point, it was like 10 cents a coin. It's kind of something that like sticks with me, to be like, that's where something starts. Like that's sort of the seed.
I did want to talk a little bit about right to repair, because I think that obviously it's a big topic of conversation these days, but also when I think about electronics being integrated into surfaces and materials, it seems a little like it'll be less and less kind of accessible to repair, right? Like even more kind of black box hidden behind, something you can't open or take apart or that sort of thing. And I just wonder, how Loomia and how you kind of think about right to repair in general, and then if you want, as far as it goes for your products and how you're developing things as well.
That's a great question. I'm definitely in support of right to repair. I feel like There's the environmental side of it, which is kind of the most obvious and probably meaningful. But I feel like there's also sort of a personal, emotional side of it where I think that feeling that you get from being like, I've had these boots for 10 years and they've done all this stuff with me. And every time the sole gets ruined, I get them repaired. Like there's something really special about having objects that matter to you. And for electronic devices, I mean, they're so expensive to produce and so damaging to produce that at least like making it so you can fix them and have a relationship beyond just like trying to chuck them somewhere, I think is super important and meaningful. But I also feel like the economic incentives are generally not there in the US. Like, why would you ever want someone to fix their thing when you could sell them a new one and make more money, which is like what our entire structure is built on. So I feel like often that's sort of the issue in the US with these kinds of things. It's like if the entire incentive is to make more money, it's very hard to push this kind of legislation even. Like even if it's just going to be like a legal requirement, it's very hard to push. But I mean, in terms of our product, I think that you bring up a great question. We talk about this a lot, especially for our automotive customers who have a general goal of decarbonizing by 2040 or 2050. So the idea is what happens at end of life when the switch package is directly laminated to the trim. Like you can't recycle the textile, you cannot remove the switch package. It's kind of these things that you were saying where it's more embedded in the materials and it's really challenging. And so I think for us, we try and sort of have two lanes that the product can take. One is laminated in, but the other one is sewn in, which lets it be something that's easier to remove at the end of life. But also these things are still like, they need a lot more work. You know, in theory, we're like, you can remove it, but it's like, who removes it? The recycling facility. If you want to repair your product, how can you get a new switch package from us as Loomia? You probably can't because we don't sell them. You know, there's not a complete solution yet. So I think it's a place where just like more work needs to be done.
Yeah, thank you for covering those different bases. I think it is a difficult question to answer, of course, but it's great to hear that Loomia is considering kind of the full product life cycle, anticipating kind of customers' needs over time. And I think the point, you bring up about legislation is key, of course. Like there needs to be different incentives for it to really be thought about in a long-term kind of scalable way. So hopefully, there'll be more progress. But like you said, more and more companies, I think, are kind of thinking about this. And, Europe has had some successful legislation in this regard. So it'll be interesting to see how that all evolves. All right. Last but not least, we just have two last questions here. What's one non-technology related thing that is inspiring you these days?
Kind of a hard one. I don't know. I mean, I always really love like architecture and interesting design in different places. And so, yesterday I was in downtown Detroit, and there's a lot of different murals. And I think looking at them is just kind of like inspiring. It gets you out of your head. And I also mentioned roller skating. I don't know, like some of these people are so good, especially in Detroit. Like if you go to the like only adult skate night, they're just like the most impressive skaters, and it brings them so much joy. And this brings me joy. And it's just kind of like I don't know, it's like an athletic feat combined with like the fun and excitement of dance. So I always really enjoy watching people who are great at skating go skating. It's very inspiring to me.
It's so fun to watch good roller skaters. They're so graceful. It really is just like dancing on water or something. It's amazing. And I do not have skills in that realm, so I'm always super extra impressed, I would say. And then yes, of course, architecture and public art and that sort of thing can be really inspiring. So I love all of those examples. And lastly, what is on your personal bill of materials?
We were talking about how you're traveling so much, and I feel like when you're young, like very young, you kind of don't, at least I feel like I didn't have a personal bill of materials. I just like did whatever and it was fine. And I'm getting older. And I definitely think eating like delicious food is part of my personal bill of materials. Like if I could only have salads, I think I would be sad.
That is so real.
Eating things that are really tasty, drinking things that are fun to drink. I really enjoy walking. I think going on like a long walk and exploring somewhere new is really fun. I don't know, just kind of like simple things. Simple things that make you happy are important to me outside of work.
I love that you specified delicious food. I thought for a second you were going to say, like when you're younger, you don't really prioritize like nutritious food, but it's really important, to get certain of these things for your brain power, whatever. But I love that it's delicious food because that is also important. I think it can be totally mood boosting too. And if you don't eat something good all day, it can be a downer. So I definitely relate to that. And walks are always good as well. And again, now I'm like a broken record with this question because everyone gives such unique answers. I'm always like, wow, we haven't had that answer yet, but we really haven't. I don't think anyone's mentioned delicious food for that question. So I need to start a running list of all the answers because I'm amazed what a nice range of responses we get. So I'm proud of that question, obviously. Thank you so much, Maddie. I think we covered a lot of interesting ground and it's always a pleasure to be able to catch up. And I think that our audience has learned a lot from this conversation.
Well, thanks a lot for having me, Magenta.
Thank you. That was Madison Maxey, founder and CEO of Loomia. The integration of e-textiles is already having a big impact in almost every industry, and the future will certainly look different than what we might imagine. This has been The Bomb, Engineering a Path Forward. If you like The Bomb, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and share the show wherever you get your podcasts. You can follow Supplyframe and Hackaday on Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, YouTube, and Design Lab at Supplyframe Design Lab on Instagram and Twitter. The Bomb is a Supplyframe podcast produced by me, Magenta Strongheart, and Ryan Tillotson. Written by Maggie Bowles and edited by Daniel Ferreira. Theme music is by Anna Hogbin, show art by Thomas Schneider, special thanks to Giovanni Salinas, Bruce Dominguez, Thomas Woodward, Jin Kumar, Jordan Clark, the entire Supplyframe team, and you, our wonderful listeners. I'm your host, Magenta Strongheart. See you next week.